life when you don't need a knife, you don't need a gun, but something still has the power to kill a man. For me, that moment came on a brutal winter night. The woman I had spent 5 years with, the one who once said, "We're family," stood behind a thick glass window, clapping and laughing as I was locked out of my own home, caught in the middle of a blizzard with temperatures dropping to 15 below zero. My name is Atlas. I'm 33 years old, and I used to think I was living in a normal marriage. Not perfect, but warm, until everything started cracking. Not with a bang, but with small, quiet clicks, like a new lock being changed without me knowing. It all started nearly 18 months ago, when Eleanor's parents moved in for a few weeks after their lease ended. That few weeks turned into 6 months. Then suddenly, Autumn, her brother, also moved in because he lost his roommate. From that point on, my 3-bedroom house didn't have any space left for me. I, who paid the mortgage, worked 2 jobs, and painted every wall myself, became the outsider. They called me the nice but naive guy, even when I was standing right there. Every objection I raised was shut down by Eleanor with one sentence. "Don't you love my family?" I stayed quiet. Men sometimes don't speak, not because it doesn't hurt, but because it hurts so much that saying it out loud would only make them feel weaker. Last Thursday was the fateful day. A vicious snowstorm hit the city. The TV warned people to stay inside, telling them not to go out if they didn't want to freeze to death. I went to work anyway, partly out of responsibility, partly because I didn't want to come home to family game night at Eleanor's family, where I was always the outsider. When my shift ended at 11 p.m., I drove through thick snow, struggling for almost an hour on a 20-minute drive. Then when I arrived, the door wouldn't open. The key didn't work. I stood there knocking, calling. Then I saw Eleanor appear behind the frosted glass. The porch light flickered on, casting her face in sharp relief, and her cold, eerie smile. "We changed the lock today," she said. "Autumn thought it would be fun." I froze. "Eleanor, please, it's 15 below out here. There's 2 feet of snow. Let me in." In response, there was a snicker. Then Autumn appeared, raising a beer. "Sorry, buddy. No room for losers tonight." Then her dad, the one who once called me the burden of stability, raised his wine glass toward me, as if celebrating the day they'd gotten rid of Atlas. I stood there, not shouting, not banging on the door, just frozen. Then she said the final words, light as air, cutting deeper into me than the cold wind outside. "Maybe you should crash at a friend's place tonight. We're having a family meeting." They clapped. Actually clapped as I turned away, staggering toward my car, my feet buried in the white snow, my heart buried in an unnamed ache. That night I sat in the car, the warmth from the heater mixing with the numbness in my chest. My phone had only 2% battery left. It shut off. Everything shut off. I drove on autopilot, finding a 24-hour diner in the middle of the night, ordered a lukewarm coffee, and sat alone for hours. It wasn't that I didn't hurt. I just stopped feeling anything. 3 days later, when I turned my phone back on, 47 messages flooded in. From Eleanor, from Autumn, from her parents. At first angry, then worried, then desperate. "Atlas, come home." "Mom didn't think it would go this far." "Autumn was just joking. We didn't know you'd disappear." "Please come back. We're family." No, I wasn't their family anymore. I never was. And then I sent one simple message to Eleanor. "Meet me at Starbucks. Noon tomorrow. Alone. Because the game is over. It's time to flip the board." Starbucks. Noon. I sat in the far corner, my old hoodie pulled up, a cold cappuccino on the table. From where I sat, I could see the entire entrance. The glass door fogged up from people's breath. It was still cold outside, but inside it felt strangely warm. Not because of the heater, but because, this time, I knew I was in control. Eleanor walked in at 12:07, late but not enough to annoy me. She came alone, a small point in her favor for the late respect. She looked around, saw me, paused for a moment, then walked over. Her makeup was light, but her red, swollen eyes couldn't hide anything. She didn't look like the Eleanor I knew, confident, sharp, always in control. Today she was lost in the very story she had created. "I don't know where to begin," Eleanor said, her voice thick and raspy. "Well, let me start," I interrupted, setting my phone on the table. The screen lit up. A video. The video played back that fateful night, Autumn laughing beside Eleanor, her parents raising their glasses in celebration, and me, standing out in the snow, treated like a joke in the middle of my own life's performance. She stared at the screen, unblinking. I watched her, not angry, not vengeful, just silent, like the snow falling outside. "I have this video, I have the texts, I have the bank statements, and I have a lawyer, if needed." She shuddered. "You don't have to do this, Atlas. You know, I used to be too afraid to do this. But that was the man left out in the snowstorm. That man is dead." I placed the printed bank statement on the table. $7,800. Gone in 2 months. Eleanor tried to explain. "My parents made a bad investment. They needed help. I was afraid you wouldn't understand. I don't understand? Or do you just not want me to understand? I emphasized every word, every syllable, like a nail in the coffin of trust. Then Autumn, he walked in. I raised an eyebrow. He's not alone. Eleanor panicked. I didn't call him. Then who did? I turned to Autumn. You just smell trouble, don't you? Autumn sat down without being invited, confident, like this place belonged to him. What do you want? He asked. Why not just let this go? You're blowing this up over something so trivial. Trivial? I chuckled, a short, cold laugh, sharp as metal. I was locked outside, almost freezing to death, and you were inside calling me useless, and now you're calling this trivial? Autumn still held that condescending smile, but I was ready. I pulled out my phone, played the audio recording of the call with my financial advisor, confirming that withdrawing money from the account without my consent was an act that could be legally prosecuted. Eleanor went pale. Autumn started to stand up, but I raised my hand to stop him. Sit down. This isn't over yet. I pulled out a piece of paper, a civil agreement, 3 conditions. Full reimbursement of the money that was withdrawn without my consent. The entire family must leave my house within 7 days. Eleanor must begin therapy if she wants to salvage anything between us. Eleanor cried, not the kind of cry to manipulate, but the tears of someone finally seeing themselves in the mirror and realizing they've lost everything. Autumn quietly backed off, not a word more. I didn't need any more of his trash talk. She looked at me for the first time in years, seeing the truth. Atlas, is there any other way? I've chosen silence, forgiveness, and letting go before. You know how that turned out. I stood up. My cold coffee was empty. This time I choose to stand up for myself. On the drive home, I felt freedom for the first time in a long while. Like a 1,000-ton weight had just fallen off my shoulders, and the snow kept falling. But this time I didn't feel cold anymore. I opened my phone. A message from Eleanor. We'll move out on time. I'm sorry. I know it's not enough, but I won't make excuses anymore. I didn't reply. I'd said enough. I came home on Friday afternoon, 2 days after that coffee meeting. The door was locked properly. No unfamiliar cars parked on the curb. A small note taped to the door. Key is under the plant. Signed, Eleanor. No goodbye. No one there. I stepped into the house that should have been my home long ago, and for the first time in years it was truly quiet. No mocking laughs from Autumn. No clinking of dishes in the kitchen, controlled by her mother. No one rearranging the furniture, changing the lights, or emphasizing how I should be grateful to live with their perfect family. I dropped my backpack standing in the middle of the living room. It was so silent I could hear my own heartbeat. And then I laughed. A short, gentle laugh. Not out of happiness, but because I was still alive. I walked around the house. The small traces of Eleanor were still there. A lavender oil diffuser on the table, a few picture frames without faces, and my favorite armchair pushed up against the wall, as if it was being punished. Punished who? The chair, or my memories? I sat down. For the first time, I felt the chair fully embrace my back. And then I fell asleep. A sleep without dreams, without disturbance. Felt like my mind could finally breathe. Saturday. I started changing everything. Little by little. First, I swapped out the cream-colored curtains Eleanor had chosen for dark gray, the color I liked. The cold white lights were replaced with warm, golden-toned bulbs. I bought new spice jars, the ones her mother had cleaned out as a petty act of revenge. And finally, I hung up the picture I had hidden away. Me, Brandon, and my sister Dorothy, standing on top of a mountain when I was 25. Wide smiles, hands raised like we were touching the sky. That picture was me, before Eleanor and her family overlapped my life with their expectations and manipulation. The next day, I adopted another dog, a small, abandoned one named Banjo. When I brought Banjo home, the neighbors were surprised. They still thought of me as Eleanor's quiet husband. But Banjo didn't care about that. He just jumped up, wagging his tail like he had been waiting for me his whole life. That night, we lay together on the couch. I scratched his head, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel lonely. A few days later, I met Dorothy, Eleanor's aunt, the one the entire family had always considered a stain, just because she wouldn't bow down to anyone. We had coffee, talked, laughed. She told me a sad story about how she had once loved, once trusted, and ultimately been betrayed, just like me. But you know what, Atlas? She said, her eyes lighting up. People like us, once we wake up, we never fall asleep again. She helped me understand something. Life doesn't demand that we be perfect. It just demands that we stay awake. And then, Eleanor texted, I've moved in with a relative. I've started therapy, not to come back to you, but because I really want to change. If one day we can sit down, not as a couple, but as two people who once loved each other, then let me know. I didn't reply. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. But I learned one thing. Not every crack needs to be mended. Some cracks are there to let the light in. That night it rained lightly. I drove slowly to the house in the suburbs, where Eleanor's family held their monthly dinner. The smell of wet earth, the warm yellow light spilling out from the windows. From a distance, I could already see the shadows moving inside. The family had a very noble tradition. Once a month, they gathered to gossip about the ones who couldn't make it. And tonight, they didn't know I was coming. I wasn't alone, though. Dorothy, Eleanor's aunt, the one they had excommunicated from the family just because she dared to live differently, was with me. We walked in. The door opened, and every eye turned to me, as if a ghost from that long winter had just materialized. Eleanor was sitting there. She looked thinner, more subdued, but her eyes lit up when she saw me. Her father, the hypocritical boss, Bronson, was carving roast meat. He paused, his face stiffened, but he managed to force a polite smile. Her mother, the one who always suggested I should have the decency to step aside for her daughter, just looked at me, saying nothing. Autumn, the golden boy in his mother's eyes, smirked. That bastard thought I was still the man shaking in the snow from the other night. I sat down in silence. Dorothy gently stood next to me, placing her hand on my shoulder. I've brought the truth with me. The dinner began with polite greetings. I nodded. Autumn was the first to speak, his voice dripping with the arrogance of someone who didn't realize he was already marked. We heard you're doing better. Good. We all have our weak moments, right? I smiled, a small smile. And then I pulled out my phone. You wanted stability, right? Here, let me show you this. I hit play. On the large screen in the corner of the room, Eleanor's laughter, Autumn's mocking voice, and the words, "Idiot, freeze to death," echoed throughout the room. The faces of everyone changed instantly. Eleanor buried her face in her hands. Her mother stood up abruptly. Bronson gripped his wineglass tightly. "Who filmed this?" he roared. I replied, "I did." While I was standing outside in minus 15 degrees Celsius, locked out there like a dog. Dorothy stood up, pulling out a thick envelope. "And this is what you've done to me, to my cousin, to Eleanor's aunt, and to a whole list of people you've pushed out of the gilded circle you've painted." She handed out each letter, each bank statement, each testimony. A family trial was happening right at the dinner table. Layer by layer, the years of manipulation were being exposed. Bronson tried to salvage the situation. "This is family. We don't air our dirty laundry at the dinner table like enemies." I stared him down. "So when I was standing outside, was it you raising a glass to celebrate getting rid of the burden?" He fell silent. Autumn looked confused, and Eleanor began to cry. And then, Dorothy's closing words. "We didn't overthrow this family. You dug your own grave with arrogance and greed." I stood up. I placed one last envelope on the table. Inside was the signed divorce paper. No shouting, no struggle. "Eleanor, I don't blame you. I just regret that you let them turn a wife into a pawn for them to control." She didn't say anything. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face. I turned and walked away. Dorothy walked beside me. The door closed behind us. Not the end of a meal, but the end of an entire reign of manipulation. After that night, I started sharing my story online. Not to seek pity, but so that anyone who had ever been treated like they didn't exist would know. You're not alone, and you have the right to stand up. My account quickly gained thousands of followers within a week. Messages flooded in from all over the world. Wives manipulated by their in-laws. Husbands betrayed. Children controlled by their parents. They all had one thing in common. They had once bowed their heads, until they couldn't anymore. I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who once stood freezing outside a doorstep with a heart shattered. But now every morning when I wake up, I make my coffee, pet banjo, open the curtains to let the sunlight in, and remind myself, I'm still writing this life. From the beginning. No one has the right to hold the pen but me. Sometimes the ending doesn't come with a big bang. It comes with a deep sigh, like the whole universe finally whispers to you, enough. That day was an ordinary Sunday morning. The air was chilly, the clouds were gray, but Banjo still barked excitedly like he'd just discovered the world. I made a hot cup of coffee and stood on the balcony, looking off into the distance. I wasn't waiting for anyone, but a part of me still wondered. Would she come? Eleanor had texted that she would come by to pick up her last things, a photo album and a watch her aunt had left her. Nothing more, nothing less. And right on time, at 10:30 a.m., the familiar silver car pulled up in front of the gate. She got out, looking thinner, paler, but with no trace of arrogance in her eyes. Eleanor wasn't wearing makeup. Her eyes had dark circles. I invited her in, without saying much. Banjo growled softly but lay still at my feet, as if he understood that today there was no need to get angry. She walked straight into the living room, not touching anything except the cardboard box I had set out for her. "Thank you for keeping these," she said. I nodded. We both stayed silent. I could see the emotions bubbling up in her eyes. Regret, maybe even a little love. But those feelings were too late now. You've really changed, she whispered, not looking at me. I used to think you'd never let go. I smiled softly. I used to think the same. Eleanor turned to leave, then stopped at the door. If I hadn't done that, do you think we could still have been okay? I looked at her for a long time, a very long time. Then I shook my head. Number, because that day showed me. The wife I loved wasn't there anymore. A tear rolled down her cheek, and this time, I didn't reach out to wipe it away. She walked out, closing the door softly behind her, and didn't look back. And that was it. No curses, no last pleas. No, just hold my hand for one more second. Just a man standing in the middle of an old house, but no longer old, because now it was his and only his. I kept living. No, I started living. I cleaned out the garage and turned it into a small workshop for restoring furniture. A side job that had now become my main passion. Banjo had his own bed, but he still liked to rest his head on my lap every night. The posts, the stories I shared online, were getting attention. People called me a survivor of a toxic marriage. Some said, I see myself in you. I don't know if I'm some kind of role model. All I know is, I survived. A month after the breakup, I received an email from Eleanor. Not long. I'm going to therapy. I'm living on my own. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just hope you're really happy, because you deserve that. I read it and didn't reply. Not because I hated her, but because I didn't need anything more. One afternoon, Dorothy, Eleanor's aunt, texted me. My friends and I are planning to start a small organization to help victims who've been through family tragedies. It will also be a place to share and find themselves again. Would you like to join? I didn't hesitate. I think I have a story strong enough to make others feel they're not alone. I nodded. All right, where do we begin? Dorothy smiled and said, from the very ending of your story. And that's it. The ashes are still warm. From the wreckage, I built a home. From the freezing cold, I learned how to warm myself again. Thank you for listening to my whole story. If you feel this story touched you, don't hesitate to leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next journeys. Falling down, rising up, and lives rewritten from the cracks. See you in another story, with a new person, or maybe even your own story.